Hello, it's midday here in London, 7 a.m. in Washington, 2 p.m. in the northern Iraqi city of Mosul, where up to 500,000 people are being forced to flee following its capture by the Islamic militant group ISIS. Families, women and children among those making their escape. The Iraqi army and police are believed to have simply abandoned their posts in the end after 4 days of violent clashes in the city. So just what is ISIS? Who are they? What do they want? The name itself stands for the jihadist Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or Al-Sham. The group's relatively young. It was formed in April of 2013 as an offshoot of an al-Qaeda group. But in just over a year, it's already become responsible for scores of deadly attacks across Iraq and Syria. As for the motivations behind those attacks, well, they're fighting for an Islamic State which would straddle the borders of both countries and indeed further across the eastern Mediterranean. We'll have more on ISIS in just a moment. First, though, Paul Adams brings us up to date on the fall of Mosul.
The exodus from Mosul goes on, perhaps as many as 500,000 people fleeing the violence that's gripped Iraq's second largest city. Roads clogged as families flee into nearby Kurdish areas. In Mosul itself, the smouldering aftermath of a battle that didn't take long. The militants attacked just 5 days ago. On Monday, the provincial governor urged residents to hold firm. Hours later, he was gone. Iraq's outgunned security forces weren't far behind. Militants now control government offices and banks too. In January, another major city, Fallujah, fell to the same hardline group, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. The government has tried and failed to take it back. Tens of thousands of people have fled. ISIS now controls a broad swathe of territory across the Middle East. In Iraq's Anbar province, Fallujah is still in rebel hands, and there's been fighting in Ramadi too. In Syria, the group is involved in fighting in Aleppo and has a regional base in Raqqa. And now, in a dramatic extension of their influence, they have Mosul too.
This group of people now, there's tens of thousands of these guys, and they now have a territory. They control territory, they control border crossing points, they control oil resources, mineral resources, trade, income. They have a base in the middle of the Middle East.
The government in Baghdad has declared a state of emergency, but is struggling to confront the militants. For a while, it seemed ISIS fighters were in control of the town of Baiji, whose major oil refinery supplies much of the country. These unverified pictures appear to show fighting before the militants reportedly left. Meanwhile, more dramatic images from the situation around Mosul, civilians crossing the Tigris River to escape the fighting. Iraq is now in the grip of a crisis as bad as anything since the Americans left in 2011. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, let's get a sense of the significance. I'm going to be speaking in just a moment to Chris Doyle, who's joined us, an expert on the Middle East, about the extent to which Western intervention in the region has perhaps led to this situation. First, though, let's get a little more on ISIS itself, what it stands for, from Hadia Al-Alawi from BBC Arabic. Hadia, you are from Iraq yourself.
Yes, I am.
Let's start with the origins of this organisation, because it's a real newcomer.
It is. It actually only started in April, formed in April 2013. And the ideology is very similar to that of Al-Qaeda. But they have so many problems and issues with the main Al-Qaeda ideology in Syria and Iraq, that they've actually become sort of a bigger power, bringing in foreign jihadists from abroad, actually, such as the UK.
So they're actually antagonistic, would you say, with Al-Qaeda?
They are. They have a lot of problems. The main problem was that the Ayman al-Zawahiri, the main head of Al-Qaeda, said that he wants them to focus on Iraq and leave Syria alone to al-Nusra Front. But that's not something that they wanted. They wanted to be involved on both scenes in Iraq and Syria, both at the same time.
Right, and across the Levant, hence the name.
Of course, yes. Islamic State in Syria and in Iraq and Syria. What they want is a wider domination, actually, over the region. And they have managed, actually, their report saying that they have around 11,000 foreign fighters. So they do attract a lot of foreign fighters to them. And
that was a point I was going to ask you, actually. Where do they all come from? Clearly not just Iraq and Syria.
No, of course not. I mean, you would think that the the majority of them actually, especially in Syria, 60% of them, the fighters are Syrians. But in Iraq, it might be slightly different situation, because not only have they attracted people from Iraq itself, like locals, who were fighting at the beginning the US-led invasion. Then they started actually fighting Iraqis and everyone who they thought was against them. They also attracted people, fighters from Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Chechnyan fighters. They've actually attracted people from the Middle East. So it's worldwide. It's not just local to Syrians and Iraqis anymore.
Right, well, it's been a big build-up. It feels like it's happened fast, and I guess this will be seen as something of a coup for them. Hadia, thanks very much indeed. Chris, let's have a look at how this has happened. There are bound to be those who say, well, the Americans pulled out, mayhem ensued.
There are those who say that. There are those who say that they should go back in. But also, of course, there are those who are saying that if they hadn't gone in there in the first place, maybe Iraq wouldn't be facing some of the issues that it is today, because al-Qaeda was not there in Iraq in 2003. But I think that ignores a cold reality, and that is that the West collectively has failed Iraq, not just since 2003, but going back decades, and that really, particularly the United States, really has never put together a strategy for Iraq that puts Iraq first, rather than, say, commercial interests, oil interests, or short-term interests. So what we see now is a local failure in Iraq itself, where there is a government under Nouri al-Maliki that is profoundly sectarian, that has alienated a huge swathe of Iraqi society that is Sunni, in the way that Saddam Hussein also alienated the Shia population when he was in power.
So on that point then, if you can have the broad brush blame on the Western allies, if you like, but Nouri al-Maliki's handling of his time in power equally has to be held up as accountable for this situation.
Absolutely. There is that local failure. He really has failed to bring together Sunni Arab politicians in Iraq. Also,
but this is bigger than that now, isn't it?
Absolutely. So then take it to the region, and we see a failure to deal with other crises. There has been spillover from Iraq into Syria, and now spillover from Syria into Iraq. And in all of these crises, there doesn't seem to be the sort of leadership to address these issues. So into that vacuum, that political failure, groups like ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra that was referred to within Syria have managed to step forward and fill in that vacuum.
So what about the idea, we've heard Nouri al-Maliki basically saying, all of you out there, grab a gun, come and help, almost. It sounds a bit of a desperate measure. But we've also got a Kurdish community saying, you know, we are ready and want to help as well. Is there a way, do you think, of overturning the ISIS position, of regaining, taking control back of Mosul and indeed the whole province?
Well, short term, there may be a military option that with foreign support, international aid and assistance, a combination of central government forces and Kurdish forces could perhaps, you know, knock ISIS back. But if that happens without a political framework, a strategy to reunite Iraq, this is just a very short-term fix-it. And if the situation in Syria continues as well, remember that Mosul is closer to Raqqa, which is also controlled by ISIS in eastern Syria, than it is to Baghdad. And so we've seen fighters and arms going across that border. So we need to see some solutions to these crises. Internationally, we need to be working together. We need to see the major powers taking this extremely serious. It's no longer just a crisis in Iraq. It really is a war. And we're seeing the sorts of large numbers of displacement of people that we've also seen in Syria. Okay, and they've got nowhere to go to.
We'll have to see how much attention is being paid to that on the ground in the real level. Chris Doyle, thanks very much indeed. Chris is the Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, and Hadia as well from BBC Arabic. Thanks for being with us.